Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Socialist Telly weekly political roundup. And well, what a week it's been, and almost none of it in a good way, sadly. We lost our friend Kailash Chand last week, and the only silver lining in that was the outpouring of love and respect for him that we saw from all kinds of quarters, not from a few that should have been, it has to be said, but by and large, from the likes of Andy Burnham and union leaders, etc., the amount of recognition that he got for a lifetime spent in service of the NHS and fighting for the NHS was heartwarming, even in the middle of all that grief. We did a special tribute program to him earlier this week, so we're not going to dwell on that for too long, but we didn't want to let the program pass without at least marking that and reminding people that we lost a hero this week. Other than that, it has been, sad to say, the usual dog's breakfast in a lot of ways, and no shortage of things to talk about. And I'm joined this week by the eminent Bonnie Craven from our Socialist Telly team. And that's the two of us, so she's the bonus for this week, because otherwise you'd be listening to me later on. So, Bonnie, why don't you lead us off on your highlight or lowlight of the week?
Well, I think for me personally, the highlight of the last week is the debacle at London Labour Conference, which obviously put a show out about last Tuesday. But the highlight, what was good about that was we managed to get that speech heard in full by many times the number of people that were stopped from hearing it at conference in the first place. So, it's we've got to fight fire with fire. We've got to make sure that people can see exactly what's going on and how negotiations, discussions, conversations, debates, and all of those are being micromanaged by those at the very top of our party, which is the opposite of democratic.
It is. I mean, we had Catherine Johnson on, who was the outgoing conference arrangements chair, who was interrupted mid-speech last week, and in an attempt to cut her off from any kind of criticism of the way that Keir Starmer is running the Labour Party, or running it into the ground, is more accurate. And that programme seemed to get a lot of interest. People were very keen to hear that speech. So, as you say, it was good that it blew up in their face, really, because they tried to clamp down and stop her from being heard. And thankfully, thanks to the wonders of Socialist Telly and social media, we were able to make sure that word got out. What else has been going on this week? I think out of a number of big things, but probably the most striking thing out of that was not so much the acquittal of Afsana Begum MP, who was put on trial wrongly for housing fraud and then acquitted. That was as it should be. The court system found no basis for a conviction. But the response or lack of response from the Labour Party to her acquittal was, I can't say it's shocking, but it was appalling. She's a pro-Corbyn MP, and it seemed very obvious that the large part of the establishment of the Labour Party, if you like, appeared to be hoping that she would get convicted, because it would give them the chance to get rid of a left-winger from Parliament and replace her with some right-wing drone that would toe the Starmer line, etc. And but they were even to the point where they were hanging around the courtroom, apparently, Labour officials ready to jump in front of the cameras and start making announcements about by-elections on the assumption that she would get convicted, and looking palpably disappointed, according to people who were there, at the fact that she was found innocent. And I thought that was absolutely terrible. But I haven't looked at his Twitter feed in much today, but Keir Starmer managed to find time to tweet about the Olympics on more than one occasion. He found time to, within minutes of it being announced, as far as I'm aware, to tweet his congratulations to Boris Bloody Johnson and Carrie Simmons on, the latest in whatever number of offspring it is that Boris Johnson's got now. It's a bit indeterminate, because he's believed to have a few kids that, one or two at least, that he hasn't publicly acknowledged. The Starmer fell over himself to get a congratulations announcement out on that, and on a day where he still hadn't said anything not even to acknowledge its existence, but the acquittal of Afsana Begum. And, and he's a former director of public prosecution. So if anybody should be outraged by the fact that she was pushed as far as having to defend herself at trial on this nonsense, then, you would assume in a decent world that would be him. And yet, we saw literally nothing from him on it. And as far as I'm aware today, still nothing. And I'll check that while you talk, Bonnie, but give us your take on that.
Well, I think what Afsana's been through recently is horrendous, having her private life thrown out for the world to see, whether she wanted it or not. And the behaviour of those at the top of our party has been absolutely despicable. But to me, and it's interesting you mentioned the Boris Johnson story as well, Steve, to me, this speaks to the problem of societal gender discrimination. Women, time and again, forced to suffer through the court system. Afsana's story is one of domestic abuse, domestic violence. And women, whenever they go through the courts where there has been domestic violence, are put a huge disadvantage. Now, Afsana's an MP, so she's got a salary, she's got certain things at her disposal. But most women who are fleeing domestic abuse haven't got that support, haven't got the money, have hopefully, may have care of the kids, probably are in a bad financial situation. So when they're taken into court for cases such as that, to be further abused by someone that they've tried to escape or by way of the court proceedings is unforgivable. And to my way of thinking, now we know that verdict, I would like to know what the judge intends to do about her abusive ex. I mean, quite frankly, this was all about causing trouble for Afsana. That is actually a vexatious claim, and he really ought to be questioned about it in the most serious form, because so long as the court system is allowed to be used to attack women who have escaped an absolutely awful situation, as long as the courts can be used for that, then women carry on being abused and women aren't safe. And of course, the Boris Johnson, there were all those stories not so long ago about what he was like with regards to the way he treats women, with the stories of the police being called to an incident between him and his now wife. But we've really got to seriously tackle what goes on with domestic abuse, because, when a woman flees a domestic abuse situation, quite often the abuser drags them through the family courts, where a woman who probably can't afford to get representation and there's no legal aid to help women are faced with being cross-examined by a person that could have tried to kill her a number of times in court and being forced to answer to that person. And while they're waiting for their hearing to be heard, they're sat in a corridor or a room facing the person who has tormented and terrorized them for we don't know how many years. We need a real shake-up and make sure that women are safe in every aspect of our legal proceedings.
Yes, I mean, for the sake of the technicalities of it, I suppose we should mention the fact that this person hasn't been convicted of anything as yet, and therefore it's alleged, I guess. But she was testifying under oath as to what was going on, and has been, it reminds me that the domestic violence spokesperson for the Labour Party was silent for the whole evening after the verdict until I think it was 1:15 in the morning, at which point she put out some tweet, a retweet of somebody else's tweet, with a comment on it about how tough it is to face up to these circumstances, but still not a congratulation or whatever, saying or welcoming the verdict. So and on that line we saw Starmer similarly be silent on when the Royal National Lifeboat Institute got attacked after Farage and a bunch of other right-wing loons decided that they were going to attack the lifeboat service for rescuing people, if asylum seekers, if they get into trouble on the sea. And when the law of the sea is the law of the sea, and it's not there, it's not up to the Lifeboat Institute to diverge from that. And rightly, they stuck up for themselves and said they wouldn't. But at the point when all these hard right wingers were, attacking the life, one of our national institutions and one of the better ones, nothing from Keir Starmer. Sajid Javid, a Tory, had commented on it. Julia Hartley-Brewer, a right-winger, had commented on it and stuck up for the Lifeboat Service. And, I think it was the next day when Starmer eventually said something, and it looked like he'd eventually kind of decided he'd better say something because there was so much kind of anger at him not saying it. And this isn't leadership,
It's not.
We would love to be on here, do it, with nothing to say about the Labour Party except well done, and let's get on with attacking the Tories. But
if we'd had instead, Steve, the leader of our party saying, actually, the RNLI do an absolutely invaluable job, but they rely on voluntary contributions. So let's nationalise the RNLI. Let's properly fund it. It should not be a charity. This is a public service, and their job, what they do, these people that volunteer on the RNLI risk their lives day in, day out, and go out on a call in the middle of the night in the worst storms, taking real chances with their own lives in order to save the lives of others. These guys are absolute heroes. And first of all, they should be paid for doing it. And second of all, there shouldn't need to be public can shaking and the public having to make donations to pay for the boats and the equipment that they need. But we're not going to see that from the current leadership, I'm afraid.
No, I mean, it does seem to be this approach of, let's just kind of hang on by our fingertips and try not to offend any Tory voters. And sooner or later, Boris Johnson will screw up, and then we might be able to pick up the pieces. But I'm not sure there's going to be much left of the Labour Party by the time that happens, because in spite of getting the easiest imaginable ride from the press, he's terrible. I mean, we saw local election results this week that saw Labour losing 15, 20 points from its voting share. It managed to win, for the sake of balance we'll put in, they managed to win one by-election that it hadn't held before, but it won it from an independent. And the independent had driven his lorry through the wall of the council offices or something because he was upset with them over a contract dispute. There were multiple kind of issues with his tenure, and he seems to have managed to eject himself almost. He forced his own resignation, as I read it, and then tried to withdraw it and couldn't. So that created the by-election. Then stood again trying to get elected, and he still managed to hold on to a chunk of his vote from the Labour Party, and Labour didn't pick up all his votes. The Tories got about a third of them as well. But in other areas, they were losing to the Tories with huge swings, and it was, and this wasn't in one particular area; it was up and down the country. And you just think, well, we have a Tory, Prime Minister who's managed to somehow be Teflon while, overseeing at least and probably driving the deaths of 150,000 people or more during the pandemic, and yet, Starmer couldn't get near him. And now that the shine seems to be coming off ever so slightly, he's still not. There are a couple of polls are putting him slightly closer, but we were told every week it seemed under, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, any other Labour leader would be 20 points ahead, and that was against the Theresa May, who didn't have Johnson's kind of ability to con people in the same way that he does.
I was seriously thinking that there needed to be a challenge on Starmer after the elections in May. But obviously, we've got another round of elections, which in London, we're just beginning to sort the candidates out for every council seat across London is up for election in May. And there are several other areas as well that are running elections. Without a change in leadership, we cannot hold on to the seats we've got. We will lose councillors. We're certainly not going to gain any. And we need some serious change going on at the top to give us a chance. We're all trying our best to get Labour people elected. But when you're met at a door with somebody saying, but you're no different to Boris Johnson, at least I know what I'm getting with him. Why shouldn't I just vote for the Tories? Because it's like Ron still, isn't it? It does what it says on the tin, and we don't know what it says on your tin. So,
well, it is, and I mean, we've already looked at the London conference, but we saw a massive move there by the Tories Freudian slip, but that's what they are.
Freudian slip, Steve.
By the Labour right, who are probably worse. To basically grab hold of the selection procedures there by hook or by crook, in order to make sure that when the candidates are selected for all this stuff, the left wingers can't get a look in. It's just
whichever left wingers we've still got in the party, Steve. That is, if they've not been prescribed.
Bleak time, yeah. So Daddy Cool is asking when we might mention Matt Wadsworth. He's on the list next, actually. But yeah, this Yvette here, Yvette said, I wonder if Jess Phillips will speak up for Afsana Begum and what she's been through. That's her job, isn't it? Well, again, for the sake of balance, we will say that Jess Phillips did eventually manage to put out one tweet kind of kind of, well, at least mentioning the victory in court, if not outright welcoming it. That may be as good as we get, I'm afraid, in the way that things are at the minute. Damien here, different Damien, not our Damien was on Socialist Telly, is saying that Starmer hasn't managed to lay a glove on the Tories. It's hard to argue. Well, I'm not sure he's tried to lay a glove on the Tories. That's the issue. Somebody is saying subtitles are really into these subtitles. Really into me. I'm not sure what that means. So yeah, let's keep Daddy Cool happy. And next on the list we have the victories over the Jewish Chronicle by Mark Wadsworth, black activist who has been treated abysmally by them over the course of years. He said after his victory that this was the 15th time, and I haven't been able to count that up personally, but the 15th time that they had either had to correct or retract false stories they put out about him. And then just after that, we saw the IPSO, the not very effective regulator, but they came down on the side of Councillor Joe Bird, a Jewish Labour councillor who had been, again, maligned by the Jewish Chronicle without foundation. And, there was a video gone out, I think it was last night, summarising the, absolutely appalling record over the past few years of the Jewish Chronicle when it comes to accuracy and truth, and in some cases harassment as well, in the case of one particular Labour activist. It's a reminder of how much the media arsenal was turned altogether on the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge, and what an easy ride Keir Starmer's getting now from the same people, and yet they still, he still can't make a dent to speak of and get any kind of a lead over Boris Johnson.
It's about time he had the Ford report as well, I would say.
That's it, yes. And tying in with that, I guess, is the issue of proscription, where we saw groups get proscribed by the Labour Party. We've already covered that in the programme, but these four groups they've done nothing really different to what they've been doing for ages, and suddenly they're beyond the pale. While right-wing groups that actually did try to damage the Labour Party were, left to get on with what they're doing. Because if you're right-wing, you can do what you like, and if you're left, then they'll find something to get you for. What's your next thing from the week, Bonnie? What else shall we move on?
Yeah, so there's been a vote on NHS pay. Obviously, the government, this NHS being my baby, my thing, the government have said, NHS staff should get a 3% pay rise. Now, first of all, that's below the rate of inflation, so that's a pay cut in real terms. And second of all, they've not pledged any extra money to pay for this. So any increase in the wage bill has to come out of the general NHS budget, which, as we all know, is being stretched by every sinew to pay for the private companies that are bullying their way into providing healthcare services. So it's a complete sham. And there was a demonstration on Friday, but it got absolutely no coverage in the establishment media whatsoever. There's a lot of anger about this, and I know that a lot of medical staff who are members of trade unions are looking to ballot for strike action. And God knows those people have been, they've kept us all together through this pandemic. People are still dying every day in massive numbers. These people need honouring, not clapping and not some medal or trinket to put on a mantelpiece. They need money to put food in their kids' bellies, and we need to sort that out. Again, Labour are nowhere to be seen on this, and it's appalling, absolutely appalling.
Commenting here from Amanda again, she seems to have got the wrong end of the stick slightly, I think. You may think my comment about subtitles is unimportant, but the message is therefore flawed for me. It wasn't that, Amanda. I didn't understand what the comment meant. So Amanda had said that the subtitles were interfering with her listening to the program. But we haven't got subtitles on because we haven't got the facility to be able to do those on a live program yet. So I'm not sure what was interfering. So, by all means, clarify, Amanda, what's impeding you being able to listen to the program. But I honestly didn't understand what it was that you got at. So, the follow-up comment there, I'm not quite sure where that was coming. Let's look at Rebels. and we saw a little bit of
We
rebellion
love a rebel.
over the past week and a bit. We saw Andy McDonald be a front bench rebel, and that's to his credit, where he went on to which radio staff, I forget, Radio 4, I think it was, and was pressed on his position on NHS pay, because we saw, I mean, it really does give me a headache. You know, the Tories wanted to give NHS and other frontline public sector workers 1% pay rise in spite of them, you know, kind of saving the country during the pandemic. And Keir Starmer, you know, the unions and the people themselves said, you know, 15% is going to be the least to be even adequate, because we've had so many real terms pay cuts over the years that's how much worse off we are. If you want to recognise what we did, then recognise it properly. Labour came in and said, oh, no, 2.1% is, you know, we'd say not 1%, 2.1%. And, you know, it's the lack of vision and ambition. And then, of course, you know, the Tories outflank Keir Starmer on the right by announcing that they're going to give a 3% pay rise, which is still pathetic, but is less pathetic than Keir Starmer's, you know, attempt. And for God's sake, back the unions, back the people, you know, doing the jobs, back the people that we need in these, you know, genuinely essential workers, you know, and demand a 15% pay rise. Do your job title, do some opposition, and stand up for people who are, you know, absolutely vital to the well-being of this country. And we saw.
I think the pandemic's shown us, Steve, that there is absolutely no excuse whatsoever in this day and age to not belong to a trade union. So please, anyone watching this, join a union. If there's one recognised in your workplace, join that. If there isn't, or if you haven't got a workplace, get into Unite in the Community. For goodness sake, we need to be unified so that we can stand against this, because it seems certain that our political voice in Westminster, as in the Labour Party that grew out the trade union movement, is not prepared to do it. It just looks to me like another Neil Kinnock leadership to me, very much, that they're actually setting about, you know, a scorched earth policy. They want all of.
Well, you almost pine for Kinnock. That's how bad he is, you know. But you know, I mean, yes, and I would say to the unions as well, you know, those who don't have sections for you know, unpaid carers and this kind of stuff at the moment, sort it out. Get your sections, because at the moment it's far too fragile. Having one union have a section, and then if you know there isn't anywhere else for anybody to go. But you know, while we're giving some plaudits to the unions, we did see the GMB this week show very good solidarity with one of their members who had been appallingly treated by a notionally Labour council, and you know, as a result, they've then withdrawn all their funding from the Labour Party in London. So it is a local thing. They haven't done it nationally, but they are doing a review of all their funding. And you know, this decision during the week to actually stop the funding in the capital city probably sent shivers up the spine of Keir Starmer, and sent him off to the with his begging bowl to the billionaires, you know. But you know, what we were talking about rebels just now as well, and we saw Dawn Butler very bravely stand up in the Commons and insist that Boris Johnson is a liar. Obviously, that's under parliamentary privilege, and the normal rules say that you're not supposed to actually tell the truth on those kind of issues. You've got to find some, you know, kind of woolly way to put it that doesn't offend anybody. And she refused and got kicked out of the House of Commons. Not a word of support from anybody in the Labour leadership for her, until a begging letter went out saying, well, wasn't Dawn Butler great? Wouldn't you like to give us some money? And we've seen again, you know, so many desperate centrists trying to claim that never happened. It's just that it was made up. I mean, we've got the bloody email.
I got the email. Did you?
Well, I didn't in my region, so it does seem to have varied from region to region. However, you know, people are very, very eager to try and write this off and pretend it never happened, because it is a massive embarrassment, you know, for anybody who supports Keir Starmer to see the Labour Party, you know, grasping in this kind of way, but refusing to actually stand up for anything. And you know,
good to see the spirit of Dennis Skinner back in the house, wasn't it?
Yeah, but some people say, well, it's not really Keir Starmer's fault, but you know, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, if somebody farted in Newcastle upon Tyne and offended somebody else, that was Jeremy Corbyn's fault as far as everyone was concerned, the media and all the right-wing MPs. So an email going out from a Labour office begging for cash off the back of something that the leadership refused to support, you know, he's got to carry the can for that. And you know, anybody who's trying to let him off because he didn't personally write the email or something can sod off, frankly, because it's just desperate to you know, to try to defend him on that basis. But yeah, so we saw him, you know, that email obviously didn't work very effectively, and we've seen him then go off and start trying to beg for cash from billionaires, and this is where, you know, this is the place that they've sunk down to now, going off and trying to scrounge cash from, I don't know, whichever kind of obscenely rich people that will no doubt demand their pound of flesh if they, you know, if they do hand over any cash, and sod what the poor people need, what the vulnerable people need, etc. It's you know, if he's gone in there to try and destroy the Labour Party, then congratulations, he couldn't be doing a much better job. So I'm getting tired of hearing my own voice here. Let's highlight, you know, some of the stuff that the Tories have been getting up to. We saw Sajid Javid last week have to withdraw his apology for saying that people shouldn't be cowering from the coronavirus. Bonnie, you've been in a situation of having to shield and vulnerable people in the family, etc. Tell us what that made you feel.
Well, I don't cower, but I do object to a government that's deliberately playing Russian roulette with my life and other people who are clinically extremely vulnerable as well. Labelling it Freedom Day was sort of an Orwellian a fait accompli. It you know, it's anything but freedom. In actual fact, I had more possibility of being able to just go out and go for a walk, or, you know, to do something socially distanced with other people who were also shielding before so-called Freedom Day than I have now. The virus hasn't gone anywhere. Apparently, I think the latest infection numbers are 1 in 65 people in the UK have got coronavirus now. That is going to have a lasting impact on people's lives. And I think what we're also going to see as well is combining it with the attacks on universal credit and the ongoing attacks on the money that the government pay out for disabled people. Coronavirus or long COVID is actually potentially going to be categorized as a disability, because it will be have an impact on people's lives for 12 months or longer. Therefore, those people fall into the net to be assessed as disabled. And if they need some help from the state, they will be entitled to it, as they should be. So I think that there is going to be an awful lot more cuts and attacks on disabled people as a result, because let's face it, this government won't be prepared. I mean, actually, probably everyone who's got long COVID ought to have a case perhaps against the government. I don't know, something for a lawyer to tell us, but this is a willful herd immunity strategy that we're being forced into, whether we like it or not. And of course, the removal of the furlough schemes and all of the other measures like work at home if you can and things like that, taking all of those things away are forcing people into a choice of risk their lives to earn some money, or die of hunger, or be made homeless and things like that. So it feels almost like anyone who's vulnerable is in a position like those farm labourers were when the Tolpuddle martyrs actually made the stand that they needed to be paid a decent wage so that they could support their families. You know, it's hundreds of years of work is being deliberately torn apart by this government, who couldn't give two figs about people who are elderly, clearly from the care home scandal, who are disabled, clearly from what I've just outlined, who are BAME, because BAME people have been disproportionately affected. It's beginning to look a little bit like this is very convenient for a government that absolutely objects to supporting the populace, which is its key function to do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the issue is, as you said, I mean, they know when they're taking these decisions, and they've admitted even with Sajid Javid's latest, kind of nonsense over this Freedom Day, etc., that 100,000 people a day will get the virus. Possibly, they're saying up to hundreds of thousands of people a day from the science groups. So they're making the choices, even with a lower death rate, and thank God it does seem to be still lower because of the vaccines or whatever. But even with a lower death rate, that means you are consciously taking thousands of people to die, and that's mass murder. I don't think it's any other way to describe it, really. And but also in terms of the people suffering on a long-term basis, it's they don't know what the effects are going to be. They don't know how long COVID is going to last. They don't know what other kind of long-term complications might pop up that take longer to reveal themselves. They're exposing all our kids to that. They are exposing vulnerable people to that. They're exposing working people to that who then may not be able to work, as you've observed. And, if, asbestos, if thalidomide, if the, blood contamination scandals, etc., are issues where the government was successfully sued and has been sued, then surely people with, start suffering long COVID, or anybody related to somebody who is, should be starting to talk to whoever, I'm sure there'll be legal people starting to put together class actions or whatever the English term, the UK term is for it, against the government for exposing people to all the, when they knew they're exposing them to the dangers and recklessly disregarded what those dangers are going to be, then it has to be. And certainly if anybody has lost somebody to COVID, they should be looking to take the government to town as well. And, I'm not particularly a fan of private prosecutions and that kind of stuff, but I want to see, Hancock and Johnson and a few other people in the dock having to defend themselves on this. And if the state won't do it, maybe it has to be something like a private prosecution.
But it's not just them, it's Chris Whitty as well, who's using his professional position to knowingly place us at risk just to stand alongside Johnson. And quite often when they do those press conferences together, Whitty comes out with something that sort of backpedals a little bit. But you just think, how can you use your professional qualifications to support somebody who is knowingly doing something that puts us at risk? So,
he was accused by the editor of The Lancet the other week, wasn't he, of knowingly misleading people.
Indeed.
By claiming that scientific opinion was split on whether we should have had this lifting of all of the antivirus measures. And, this guy said, well, it's not split. There's a tiny number of people who think it's going to be fine. And there's a huge number of people, including 1,200, who put their name to a letter of, kind of world-renowned experts saying that is, it's insane to do it, and yet they went ahead and did it, and then try and persuade us all after the fact that really it was fine, and they were on top of it all along.
Of course, the problems in schools are much less in public schools, because you've probably got 10 or 12 pupils in a large, well-ventilated, probably air-conditioned and air-filtered classroom, whereas for our kids, your kids and my kids, Steve, they're in a classroom of at least 32 other kids with goodness knows how many adults coming in as well. No ventilation. They're lucky if you can open a window in a lot of classrooms, or if you can, more than a crack, because of, reasonable health and safety precautions. But they've had 18 months now to put measures in place in our schools to make them safer. There was talk a year ago of Nightingale Classrooms, and there was also evidence to say that if they brought HEPA filters for the classrooms as well, so they could pump the air through, because it's being an airborne virus, they could make it safer. But what did the government do? They removed they resisted all along a commitment for children to wear face masks and the staff to wear face masks. And now most schools are not enforcing any kind of face mask wearing, which, again, it just smacks of negligence.
It does. And I mean, it's just coming here, about the Labour Party's funds going, so the negligence is all over the place. But it's not. I mean, negligence carries this kind of sense of accidental, and I don't think it's accidental at all. I think they know full well what the risks are, and they just frankly don't give a stuff. So they're ploughing ahead with it, recklessly and willfully negligent rather than just negligent. I don't even often use the word incompetence, because I think most of it hasn't been down to them being incompetent; it's been down to them being malignant.
On that point, Steve, at the start of this pandemic, I was scratching my head thinking the government can't let us follow a herd immunity strategy, because the working class go out and make money for the boss class. Okay, and if we're all sick with this virus, we can't be making their stuff, and we can't be out there buying their stuff. So, it's going to affect a lot of businesses. But what we've seen has happened is this Tory government don't give a stuff even about the economy. I think that there are other people. I mean, you only have to look at how many billionaires have been created during this pandemic, and how many billions of pounds of our tax money have gone to mates of the government to provide services. It seems seems to me that that's all they're interested in is the wealthy few. I mean, the very few, and they've never had it so good.
Yes. And Amanda's here pointing out that 60% of the people who died from the virus have been suffering from a disability. And, you know, it has been this sense of a cull, a kind of, you know, hesitant to use comparisons with the Nazis, but it is this kind of disregard for the life of anybody they consider less productive, you know, these useless eaters.
Yeah, it feels a bit like eugenics, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, well, it is. And I mean, you know, quite a few of them have been, you know, open fans of eugenics anyway, so it's not exactly surprising. I mean, you know, Dominic Cummings is spilling the beans on what Johnson got up to in a lot of regards now. However, you know, Cummings has written stuff that sounds like eugenics as well. So you know, it's that kind of situation where, you know, you worry that anybody who is considered to be less productive, it's all about being productive, you know, is going to be considered not worth supporting and just allowed to go. I mean, like these do not resuscitate orders on, you know, put on disabled people and elderly people, etc. Not one, you know, saying don't even bother trying to save them if they get into, you know, serious ill health and so on, and not given the choice about that. And that is, you know, that is involuntary euthanasia. You know, whatever you view on voluntary euthanasia is, it shouldn't be imposed on people without their families' wishes. You know. On the topic of disabled people, though, again, we have to say the Labour Party is not doing really very much better than the Tories. And again, we need opposition. We don't need, you know, collusion and complicity in the whole thing. And we have seen a furore this kick-off today, rightly as far as I can tell about this, and I'll bring it up on the screen, see if I can get it working. Angela Rayner's comments about her disabled son, but about you know, implying stuff about disabled people in general. And I'll let you talk about that once we've heard it.
Unfortunately, I think many people who live with a disability today have seen their standard of living decline under the Conservatives, and this strategy does nothing to address those issues. The announcement today that I've made on flexible working will enable people to be able to work their hours in a way that supports them with their abilities, rather than make them feel that they've got a disability that prevents them from going into the workplace. I've got a disabled son. I want to see him celebrated and his world of work to be transformed, because he's my little miracle, and the fact that he's able to do the things he can do. I don't like to see him as a disabled son. I like to see him as an enabled son to live a fruitful and fantastic life, and I think he can do that. And it's the inflexibility within the system at the moment that reminds him every single day of the things he can't do, rather than supports him in the things he can do. And that's what we should be doing. That's what the government should be doing, is supporting people to live good, healthy, balanced lives.
That seems to have offended a lot of people. I mean, Morrigan Wolf here, just straight underneath, as a disabled woman with a disabled son, I find this extremely disturbing. There's nothing wrong with being disabled. Angela Rayner, shame on you. So, Bonnie, give us your take on that, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, another person who responded to that news story made the point that the difficulties for disabled people are not inflexibility, it's an issue with accessibility. So there are still too many things in our society that are not adapted or adaptable for people with various disabilities, and that's what needs to be fixed. Not to cut people out of social life, and not to cut people out of jobs and work and leisure time and all of that. We need to fix a hell of a lot of society. It's not about trying to paper over the cracks and trying to make out that everything's great for somebody. It's, you know, it's a much bigger problem. And of course, what we've seen through the pandemic, as we were just discussing, is disabled people's rights have been completely dismissed through this. It is eugenics. She needs to call it out as such. And she's failed to utterly. People are being killed, and with Freedom Day, disabled people have never been more at risk of this virus. She needs to have a little think, sit down and look at what real challenges her son is facing. And speaking, I had a premature baby as well, like she did. I mean, luckily, you know, he wasn't affected by in the long term for it, But to use it in such a way it just leaves a really bad taste, doesn't it? This is ableism, and I know a lot of disabled activists are really, really upset about this. She ought to have known better, but it's not the first time she's made a gaffe, is it, on a speech or an interview in the last week?
No, well, we saw her also. I don't know if it was a gaffe. I mean, it was just, the interviewer tried to put her on the spot to say whether Labour would actually outlaw 0 hours contracts, which are the contracts that mean that people are very insecure in their work. They don't know what their income is going to be from one week to the next, but it also makes it harder for them to claim any benefits and support on that, because they might get more one week and then get none the next. So, those things, the government tries to pretend as though people love them. No, people love flexibility. They don't love insecurity. And, Angela Rayner was asked, I think 3 times it was in the course of the interview, look, aren't you going to just say that Labour is against 0 hours contracts? And she wouldn't.
Well, she can't, can she? They've just sacked a load of permanent staff.
Well, that's it. And I mean, it's ironic, really, them putting, her to take the flak for that, and Keir Starmer yet again hiding and making sure somebody else gets the punishment. But Labour doesn't really oppose these contracts. Labour, I don't think, probably gets the contracts half the time as to understand. They think it's a flexible contract where you can just decide if you want to work or not. Well, surely that must be great. Well, it is, as long as there's work available for you to decide if you want to do it or not. But on
it's great if you can have flexible mortgages or rent as well, isn't it?
Well, exactly, yeah. So your cost of living doesn't go down or flex because you're working a bit less or a bit more. And putting employers in the driving seat where they can just decide from one week to the next, I want this person, no, I don't want them this week, and all I've got to do is tell them so, etc. If you're not standing against that, then what the hell are you doing calling yourself the Labour Party? Because, if it's supposed to be about people doing jobs, then give them the ability to do jobs and actually make a living from it. Because if you don't, then, even improving benefits, only puts the cost on taxpayers rather than on companies that should be paying the wages for the people that they're using for work. It is just,
when it puts me in mind, when I was a kid, I was horrified when I realised that there were a huge swathe of people in London who worked on the docks who didn't have a job as such. They'd have to turn up at the docks at a certain time in the morning and hope that they would get picked for a day's work. And only then would they know if they'd earned some money to feed the family and to pay their bills. And it seems that, I thought that was absolutely ludicrous and a ridiculous way of managing a society. And yet we're right back there now. Where's the progress? How can that be allowed? And the reason that's happening now is, I have to go back to it. It's Thatcher's destroying the trade unions, because when you've got a unionised workplace, you can't get away with this nonsense.
No, and I mean, nobody really doubts that the Tories would love to get back to the days where people had to queue up and hope somebody was going to give them some work because you didn't have to pay them very much. But you would assume in normal circumstances that the Labour Party would be opposed to those things and want to see a different outcome. And it's really hard to discern, any.
It's the very reason they were set up
outcomes between the Tories. When we look at NHS privatisation, for example, and I think somebody mentioned that in the comments as well. It's really hard to get a fag paper between Labour and the Tories on almost everything about what the Tories want to do with the NHS, because the Labour, the current Labour Health Secretary, Shadow Health Secretary, seems to be quite comfortable with the idea of private companies providing in the NHS, of badging things as NHS when really it's a profit-making enterprise, etc. And but the flat thing, we need Labour politicians to be prepared to stand up on the telly and refuse to not be heard on the issue and say, look, profit in healthcare means less healthcare. We cannot afford that, to be squandering money on, profit margins that end up in offshore bank accounts or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of this new legislation that's currently going through is they're called integrated care systems, ICSs, which is a variation on the exact setup they've got in the United States. And what that's about is bringing social care into the NHS. Now, that seems great. It should be a joined up service. But the trouble is, about 90% of the provision of social care is in private companies. So by bringing them into the NHS, you're further accelerating means testing treatment and profitizing for those companies that want to make a few quid out of it. And obviously the best way to make money for yourself, if you've got a certain budget, is to deny treatments and do things on the cheap as much as you possibly can. So this is not a good outcome. Nationalize social care and then combine it with the NHS. And while we're at it, let's have dentistry and optometry brought back in properly into the NHS, so no one
free
has to struggle
prescriptions
about
and stuff as well. So
yeah,
I mean, as with so many things,
we're
we're seeing about this bastardization of Corbyn policies, where they keep the shell, they hollow them out, keep the shell of the thing, so they can pretend that they're doing something that is helping, and yet and then use it as a vehicle for doing more crap that they shouldn't be allowed to get away with, and frankly, again, should be in the dock for in a lot of cases. At the moment, as somebody pointed out in the comments, we're seeing Keir Starmer accepting staff from a large accountancy firm that helps people to avoid their taxes, etc., and taking freebies from them. How can that the company says it's not trying to influence policy by that, but how can Starmer say that he's not being influenced if he's prepared to to take freebies? And we saw, of course, the other thing of last week, so £100,000 worth of freebies being taken on I think it was on Freedom Day, what they called it, from various companies, promoting their businesses and so on, including Labour politicians. It has to be different. We need an alternative, and at the moment, tragically, the party that should be the alternative just isn't. It's just
Zara Sultana did a thing, didn't she? When she was first elected, she did a video of the boxes of goodies that private companies have given to her. And this is a standard practice. I think a lot of private companies send gifts to new MPs. Now, they're not doing that out of they might, but I suspect they're not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it to win some kind of favour. These packs are very, very expensive. They're luxury things. They shouldn't be sending those to the politicians. What they need to be doing is just paying their taxes. That would be a good start.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, as we've seen a few memes going around this week as well, if billionaires can afford to get into a space race with each other, then it's a good, it's proof essentially that that they're not being taxed enough. We're not interested in being the playground for the rich. We're supposed to be a decent democratic country that looks after its its sick and its disabled and behaves like a civilized nation, essentially. Ellie Green there, yep. The British Medical Association did say the government is involved in social murder at the moment. I think you could probably take the social off and just call it murder, and it would still be perfectly accurate.
And, Steve, on the topic of people taking money that they aren't entitled to or currying favour with people, any idea what the Director of Public Prosecution's salary might be? Do you reckon it'll be 18 grand a year, 15 grand a year, something like that?
Maybe more like a month,
Or yeah. I mean, I saw your story recently about Keir claiming an excessive amount of money for cab fares to get from home to work.
That was my story, but yes, it was in the news. £160,000, I think it was, across a little bit further. He lives 4 miles away from where he worked, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a
story a chauffeur-driven car or something.
There was a story a couple of years ago of somebody in the Conservative government that worked in the transport team getting taxis to and from Westminster. He lives on the district line. He could have got a train like anybody else. I've travelled the length and breadth of this country with Jeremy when he was leader of the Labour Party. And it wasn't a problem. It really wasn't. People would come up and say hi and, ask some questions and stuff. But it wasn't a problem. Why do these people think they're so special that they can't travel like the rest of us? If public transport's not good enough for them, they need to do something to fix it, because most of us travel in it every day. And we, it's just what we have to do. There's no choice.
Yes, I suspect there's a little bit of thinking that they merit better, something better than the rest of us, but also they're probably terrified to bump into real people and have to face up to, any kind of reckoning for the, for the stuff that they do to everybody. And, sadly, it seems that Keir Starmer was in that boat as well when it came to acting as the DPP, that he didn't want to, have to mix with the hoi polloi or whatever. So, yeah, that's where we are. I mean, we're pretty much at the end of the program, I think. But you know, I do apologise to people who've watched. Well, thank you, people who've watched, but I apologise that it is just bleak at the moment. But you know,
there is one highlight, Steve, that we haven't mentioned yet.
Oh,
It's enjoying the soap opera that is Matt Hancock.
Well, I guess
let's have a go at one of the Tories. They you know, they are the government, and they are the people that are killing our people. So yeah, I mean, I said previously that I was upset that Matt Hancock had to resign because he was having an affair. I don't think it's not okay. It's not all right. But when he was the minister responsible for our health and well-being and made decisions that have cost us at least 150,000 lives of working class people, of us, for him to leave on that basis is an absolute insult. And you know, he had the neck to seem to think he was going to be able to stay in post as well. He should have been got rid of long ago when we found out about the contract to, wasn't there a contract to a landlord, like a pub landlord or something? All sorts.
His local pub landlord, I gather, had got some kind of big contract. It did seem to be, you know, mates and donors, and that was that. You know, there ought to be a reckoning for that. Sadly, the way things are at the minute, I'm not sure that there will be, but because there isn't anybody on the other side of the House of Commons prepared to actually call for one, which is a tragedy. So I think we've probably come to the natural end of things. Again, thank you everybody who's watched. If you're watching this on catch up, thank you for that. Do your bit on the social media channels if you haven't already done that, to make sure that you keep up with the Socialist Telly output, and do follow Bonnie at Bonnie Craven on Twitter as well. Make sure you keep up with what she's doing. But yeah, I do apologize. You know, it's not nice to have to come on and everything is bleak. You know, but this is what the world is when there's nobody, you know, in a position to get themselves heard properly. You know, on the opposite benches and in the television studios representing the so-called opposition in this country, who are prepared to actually stand up and oppose and refuse to be silenced about what's going on. Keir Starmer doesn't need to be silenced. I don't think he's perfectly happy not to say anything. It certainly gives that impression. And you know, we need opposition. This country needs opposition, and at the moment, the democracy in this country is you know, is pretty much broken. And the only question is whether it's retrievable or not. And again, that's hanging in the balance in various arenas at the moment as well. So
something I just wanted to say on that, Steve, something that I've seen a bit of discussion over the last week is on the voting system that we have in this country. So, I mean, that's a whole debate that will probably need 3 or 4 programs to cover. But people are beginning to look at whether or not our democracy actually serves us as a fully functioning democracy. And one of the ways some people are looking at addressing that is having a look at the first past the post system, because obviously what that does is it means that smaller, newer parties are going to struggle harder than the established ones to make a mark on parliamentary legislation because of the way that the system works. I mean, where I live, I'm so sick of the Lib Dems. Every Lib Dem leaflet that goes out says it's either us or the Tories here. Labour can't win. Well, they can. We came close to it. We came closer than we ever have come to it in 2017. And things are changing. God knows my neighbours know that we need to change things around. But the way that the system works is it's not helpful to a proper opposition, or for people to be, or for political parties to be scrutinised and held to full account for the things that they do to the people.
Yes, and there's one thing just occurred to me as well there while you were talking, and let's not lower ourselves to the same level as Keir Starmer's lack of comment on things, you know, with regard to people he doesn't agree with. Wes Streeting's certainly no friend of this program, and you know, Squawk that I write has done plenty to embarrass him in the past, but he has, I gather today, announced that he's cancer free and getting back into parliamentary work. I just wish he would be, you know, would do something decent while he's there. But, you know, we wouldn't wish cancer on anybody. And we're glad to hear that he's doing all right. So we
can start by standing up for the NHS, which has no doubt saved his life. There we go.
Yeah. And I think, is he in education or something to do with schools, isn't he, as well? So schools is at the heart of a lot of what's going on at the minute. And you know, there isn't anything decent being done from the opposition benches there either at the minute. So, you know, Mr. Streeton, do step up and do that, and we might just be able to say something positive about the Labour Party for a change. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Of all people.
No, well, I'm prepared to be surprised. I don't expect to be, but I'm prepared to be. But I'm glad he's better, and that his treatment has been successful. So thank you, everybody, for that. I'll be back, all being well, on Squawk Talk tomorrow night. May hopefully have some very interesting guests to announce for you very shortly if all the pieces fall into line. And you know, so do catch up, do share, and keep following, and take care of yourself.
Out of the NHS data grab as well.
Well, yeah, and stand up like our friend Kailash wanted. You know, stand up for the NHS, because it's never been under more threat than it is just now. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you again very shortly. Take care.
See ya.